Hi, I'm Kaylee Roberts, and today I'm going to sit down with Jim Littlefield, the author of the new book, The Slave Catcher's Woman, which was published in March of 2013. So, hi, how are you?
Hi, it's good to be here.
Good. So do you want to give us a short synopsis of the book, just to get started?
Sure, it's a book on slavery. It is a novel, as you said. I've taught history for a lot of years, so novels are not the kind of thing that I would normally be involved in. But because I became interested in this issue, and because I happen to do Civil War reenacting, and because, it's a perfect storm, my wife and I bought a bloodhound, a dog. It seems as if the issue of slavery became more and more important, and as I researched it and gathered information, I started to think that there was a lot of stuff here that the public would be interested in.
Now they say a tracking man who is on foot can cover about 3 miles in an hour behind a good hound dog. On horseback, without the dog, however, I reached the plantation in less than half the time. "Your horse, sir," was the first words out of the mouth of a rather well-dressed black man who had the appearance of some sort of coachman. He wore high boots, with coat and tie, and his mannerisms showed good breeding and refinement. I
came up with a character named Coswell Elias Timms. And I have to tell you that this character, I reenacted this character out in public for various Civil War roundtables or some living histories in school programs and things like that, way before I started to write him into a book form. But it became obvious that I had enough information, enough really, really interesting information, so that I could write the story of his life, and really in such a way that people would grab on to him as a character. He's engaging, and yet he's a slave catcher. You want to hate him at the beginning, but he turns out to be a very likable character throughout the story.
Thinking back, I remember the plantation owner, Mr. Jarrett, had been quite clear that this would be no ordinary fugitive we'd be a-tracking this day. Big Sandy had run off 3 or 4 times in the last couple of years and had been whipped repeatedly, all to no good end. Even the threat of castration and constant reminders that he could be sold down the river, where he was assured conditions was much worse than the Jarrett place, did nothing to change Big Sandy's disposition. He remained as ornery and uncooperative as ever.
Because the story really revolved around Cynthia, this love of his life. I mean, he is smitten with this woman. There are those that say that there is love at first sight, and I believe that. I met my wife in the 2nd grade. We've been married 48 years.
Okay, so it definitely is a love story, but it sounds like it's a lot more than that, too.
Yes, I mean, it's an excuse to really present history as it was in a way that I think people would be willing to invest their free time. When you've got students in school, you've got Johnny Cash singing to a bunch of prisoners. I mean, it's not like they can have an option to leave. I mean, they are there because it's on their schedule. But when you graduate, I mean, you still want history to be meaningful, you've got to find a way to get people to want to buy a book, read a book. The investment of a book, it's 288 pages, 105,000 words, 23 chapters and illustrations. I mean, it's an investment. And so if anybody's going to invest, there has to be a reason for that. So, the story catches you, and the story is engaging. And when you're done, you say, my God, I didn't know that about bloodhounds. I didn't know that's how you take an arrow out of a person and do the least amount of damage. I didn't know that that's what medical practice was all about then. Yeah. Or that there was a prison, and that all of this stuff is real, and it's all woven into the story.
At full light, when me and Jessie finally got ourselves out of bed, we could see clearly the fugitive we had returned to the plantation the night before. He was a-hangin' there outside the barn, with the flies already startin' to take notice. His world was upside down, for sure, just as Jarrett had commanded. It was a pitiful sight to behold. I was certain sure that image wasn't lost on the bondsmen who had walked by earlier to take their places out in the fields. Maybe their world wasn't that much different than his, I thought silently to myself. But after all is said and done, I concluded, didn't matter a lick what Coswell Timms thought on the matter. If things went the way they did most times, why, this new day would be just like any other summer day under the hot Georgia sun.
The cast of characters is memorable. I have a Simon Legree that everybody will boo and hiss and everybody will hate. His name is James Walker. Like most of the characters, he's real. He's a real character. There might be a relative of James Walker that eventually will come and try to find me, but in slave narratives, I have it documented that many of the things that he did in the book, he actually did. So he is a big part of the story as well. So the Bloodhounds, except for one, I either own or friends of mine own. The names are just the same, and they are almost as human as the people that they're chasing. So if people like dogs, they like animals. They're going to learn an awful lot about training and care, and of course the sorrow that comes when you lose your pet, when you lose a pet, particularly if the pet is it's a comrade in arms and part of, just like a soldier losing a dog in war, or a police officer losing a dog, out on duty.
Yeah.
When a dog is lost here, it's a double negative. They're also very expensive, so maybe a triple negative.
So there's that too.
Yeah, so that's in there. And I had a number of the people that have read it have said, every time something happened to one of the dogs, I just broke down and started crying. Well, that's part of the story.
How did you develop the Southern perspective?
My wife laughs at me. She says, you are as Yankee can be. My family goes back to England, and I am a long time. I lived in this town since my family since 1860. So, but I started to do these characters in Civil War reenacting, and I belonged to a Southern group. I belonged to the 1st Maryland. And when I got this dog, I moved away from the character I was doing, who was a blacksmith. And I started to think in terms of doing a presentation as a slave catcher with this dog. However, that would require a Southern accent. I happen to have a friend who lives in Montville, and he is from North Carolina. And so I put my presentation, I gave him my presentation, he put it on tape. He sent it back to me. I practiced the various intonations of a Southerner doing this, and I started to begin to talk like Coswell Timms. And I finally got so that I could do a pretty good convincing job of it. Now what I did is I put this on tape and I sent it to Georgia, down to my friends down in Georgia, and I awaited an evaluation. And they said, it's an acceptable Southern accent. It's not Georgian. That's what you're supposed to say.
Okay.
However, it sounds Carolina. Well, Pat Caudle was from North Carolina. So I think that the accent it's a little bit Carolinian and it's a little bit Mississippian. And it tends to fall there. And so I think that was fun doing, because you can get into character and you can find yourself almost transported. So what I did in the book, everything is in first person, and the G's have been dropped, and all the slang and everything is in there just as I would say it. And what was great is I wrote it, I often said it and recorded it to hear how it sounded. So I've had people say, well, the first chapter or so, I didn't expect that. It took me a while to kind of get into the flow of it. I felt transported. I felt like I was there. So that's what I wanted to do with that. So I'm a Northerner, but I've had a great deal of fun finding myself transported to another place and another perspective, and having a chance through Coswell Timms to tell the story.
Yeah. So you said you visited down south for a week.
I flew into Atlanta airport, and Hugh Harrington, who's a writer, has written 5 books on Southern history, and he and his wife Susan picked me up at the airport. I stayed with them for a week. I visited slave quarters. I visited graveyards where most of these characters in the book actually reside.
Wow.
Actually reside.
So they were actual people.
Most of them were actual people.
Oh wow.
So one of them was the prostitute. She's buried right there. I stopped and saw Phoebe Brown. I saw Doc Fort, who was always patching poor Jesse up. I tipped my hat to him. The old mayor was there. The guy, the postman, who is the sheriff. The sheriff's the real sheriff. The postman's the real postman.
Wow.
Cynthia's not buried there, and there's reasons. And Coswell's not real. Coswell's a composite character, as is Jesse. There's a Jesse Timms, but he didn't live there. Mr. Walker, Boo Hiss, is not there, and there's other reasons for that. But most of the characters in the book are located in Memory Hill. Hugh Harrington wrote books about Milledgeville. He wrote 4 of them. And he did most of the research on these characters because he wrote for a newspaper down there. And he went through all of the Southern Recorder and the Grand Union newspapers, and he put all of this stuff on, he put this into a book in little vignettes. So I would run into a character, a sheriff. I would run into a doctor. I would run into, and I would say, man, I know what they could be doing. I got a perfect job for them in my book. And Hugh helped me a great deal, and he loved it when I borrowed these characters because he felt like he had given birth to them. And so I was giving them a whole new lease on life. So we had a ball doing this, and I would write a chapter, and I'd send it down to him, and he'd say, I love it, but so he wouldn't have done this. Okay, let me change that. Or, wait a minute, you got this guy going in the wrong direction. If he's in the wagon and he's headed for Macon, he's going to head. So, oh, no, there's a swamp there. You can't. If he's going to escape, you can't go that way unless you got him in the swamp. So I had a person on the scene.
Okay, but I mean, despite all that, why do you think people are going to pick up your book off?
People who make quality decisions at certain times, and I think the reader becomes very intrigued with him. He has a Mark Twain flavor. He's a homeboy. He's a bit of a backwoods philosopher. He's engaging. So the cast of characters, I think, is endearing, and even the bad ones, you can tell they're bad. There's white hats and there's black hats, and there's certainly plenty of color in between, where people gravitate one way or the other depending on circumstances, like we all do.
Okay. It sounds like real life was mostly your inspiration for these
so.
characters. Yeah.
I hope so. I think it's real life.
Yeah.
I've been told that that's what it does. It isn't a Mount Olympus group of people that no one can relate to. They're pretty real.